In the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we learn about three of God's people who find themselves in a kingdom where they're being told they have to worship something other than their God. They find themselves in an act of defiance. And the challenge has been laid out by the king: either bow down or be thrown into a fiery furnace. And these three men, they issue their own challenge right back. We don't need to defend ourselves before you in this matter, they say to him. Those are fighting words. Nebuchadnezzar's challenge was in the question that he asked them just before their response. His question was, what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego wouldn't bow, so the king laid down this challenge: do it or be thrown into a furnace. And his fury at them is in their defiance. That's so deep. His fury is so deep that he is willing to burn them. But specifically with them, he wants to burn them 7 times hotter than the furnace usually burns. And he does this in response, like, what God will be able to rescue you, he asks. And their response is, we don't need to answer to you in this matter. But his question, what God will be able to rescue you, is almost like him asking, well, what God is bigger and stronger than me? I mean, I feel like we're on a playground at an elementary school at this point. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they don't play any games. They issue this theological statement that's so profound and so intense that we have to pay attention to it. And it's in Daniel chapter 3, verses 17 and 18. This is their response. If we are thrown into a blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your God or worship the image of gold that you have set up. They know that God is able. They also know that God is strong enough to save them. They also know that it may not happen. And it may not happen not because God isn't strong enough. That's made clear that they believe that in verse 18, that if God doesn't deliver them, they still believe that God is strong enough. They still choose to worship God alone. For them, it's not about God's ability, but about God's will. For them, it's not about the strength of their faith, but about the strength of their God. The musical Hamilton recently had a moment at the Tonys where the original cast came together for their 10-year reunion. And the story, if you don't know of the musical, is centered around the first Secretary of Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, a natural subject for a musical, right? But somehow it works. Anyway, I think that's why this came to mind as I was studying the text this week, because I watched their performance at the Tonys, and this line from the musical kept coming to mind as I was studying the text this week. It's actually a lyric from the song Right Hand Man, where George Washington and Alexander Hamilton are discussing their fight, their struggles against the British. And George Washington's being very honest with Alexander in this moment, and he is saying, I don't think we have enough people to win this war. And Alexander, he's like raring to go. He's ready to fight. And George Washington says to him, dying is easy, young man. Living is harder. And I realized that this line came to mind this week because saying that we are Christians is easy. Living like one is harder. Trusting God when you face a fiery circumstance is hard. Facing the fury of an idol that you have in your life that doesn't want to give up its power in your life, it's almost impossible. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't have to stand before King Nebuchadnezzar. They could have bowed. They could have apologized when they were confronted with his fury, but they chose not to merely say that they believe, only to then turn around and change their mind when maybe God wasn't going to deliver them. But they chose to trust in who they believe. Trust him with their very lives. So, my question for you is, in what ways are we living our lives that merely say, I'm a Christian, instead of living one that says, I am willing to take up the cross and live like one? Living as a Christian, one willing to take up the cross of sacrifice, of death, is an act of defiance. It's an act of defiance against our idols, against our sin, against the world, even in some ways. And the way of Christ is this very powerful statement of a love that is so deep that the love itself is an act of defiance. Because we have never done anything that is worthy of that love. And yet Jesus died for us anyway. I think King Nebuchadnezzar wraps it up fairly well at the end of chapter 3 when he says, they trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Our vision as a church is to be a church that passionately pursues Jesus and sacrificially serves our neighbor. And nothing about those two statements looks like the world. So it's worth asking again, in what ways are you living your life that merely looks like you're a Christian, instead of a life that says, I'm willing to take up my cross and actually be one?